With both the Giants and the Cardinals long since eliminated, you might think this final series of the year means nothing, but quite to the contrary, there's a lot at stake for the team and for individual players.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting this show for over 5 years, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball, and get the Booking.com app today. And coming up on today's show, we're going to get into what's at stake in this final series of the year. It may seem meaningless, but in my opinion, to the contrary, they are playing for a lot here. And also strikeouts. Like, it's been a hot topic, and they had, like, the other day against Arizona when they lost, they struck out like 17 times. And has it been as big of a deal as it's been made out to be? And then also I want to get into how the Giants, by winning 2 out of 3 against Arizona, really in a unique way messed with Arizona's clinch probabilities and chances, and the way they would clinch if they did clinch. It's very bizarre. So stay tuned for that later on. But ultimately, the Giants have 3 games left. And when I say what's at stake, I mean, I could do a whole episode on what's at stake. I think that a lot is at stake. One thing, the first thing that comes to mind is the status of Farhan Zaidi. Do I think ultimately now, with 3 games remaining, that these 3 games will have any significant effect on how he's evaluated? No. I think, based on the fact that it's only 3 games, and also the fact that Andrew Baggarly of The Athletic reported the other day that it was like a quote, I'm almost direct quoting here, I don't have it pulled up, but that all indications are that the board has made its decision on Farhan Zaidi, and that they're waiting for the season to end in order to kind of speak to the future direction of the team. And I said that, combined with the fact that Farhan Zaidi says he doesn't know his status, was not a good sign for him. Because if they were like, yeah, we're going to keep you, why would they not just tell the man, right? Leaving him in limbo like that seems cruel, but it seems cruel either way. So I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen there. I'm not saying I know one way or the other. I'd probably put the odds at like 60-40 he's not brought back, but still I'm not certain. And at the end of the day, I mean, the Giants, so what's at stake? The first thing that's tangibly at stake is their record, right? 79 wins right now. So obviously the worst they could end up is 79-83 if they're swept. And if they do sweep themselves, they could finish as high as 82-80, which would be like very unexciting, but it would be a winning season. It would just be the second under Farhan Zaidi in 6 seasons. They've been close. I mean, they were 81-81. The shortened season, they were 29-31, and then this year they're going to be right around 500 again. So it's not been that they've been awful. It's been that they've been maddeningly mediocre year in and year out outside of 2021. And so record, I think it matters to the team. It matters to the players. I think they want at least to be at 500. And so they're set up pretty well to if they can just win the series, win 2 out of 3, they'll be at least 500. I mean, if they win 2 out of 3, they'll be at 81-81, which would be just the second time in franchise history they would be exactly 500, dating back to the 1800s. It happened a couple years ago, and it may very well happen again. It may be the most likely individual of all the possible outcomes, that may be the most likely. And if they can sweep, they finish above 500. If they lose 2 out of 3, 80 and 82, and if they get swept, 79 and 83. So no matter how you slice it, it's going to look 500-ish. But there's also individual players playing for things, right? Like, we've discussed this before, but you've got certain players who are playing for their next contract. And one of the guys who comes to mind the most is Blake Snell, because he is scheduled to make his final start of the year on Saturday, and he's obviously on this ridiculous hot streak since coming off the injured list in June, and he gets one more start here. And so if he can just have another great outing, because we have seen him even during this stretch of dominance, like, he's had some rough ones where, like, he only went one inning, and so for him, playing for his next contract to end the season with just another dominant outing would go a long way. I mean, it shouldn't, but it could. Like, if you get blown up in your final outing, maybe, and obviously health is paramount too for guys like this who are hitting free agency. And other Giants who are hitting free agency include Michael Conforto, who is playing for his next contract. They don't have a lot of guys. Mark Canha, he was just a deadline acquisition to try to basically kind of, in my opinion, fill in that Wilmer Flores type of role, and it hasn't really mattered. Like, he's kind of been a non-factor. He did have a big hit. I think it was in Washington, D.C., but basically, so he's 35. He's going to turn 36 in February, and so in all likelihood, Mark Canha is not going to be back with the Giants, and he's just worth pointing out, he is a free agent at the end of the year. Blake Snell, of course, has the opt-out. Conforto is a pure free agent. He has been playing well recently. I do not think Conforto will be back with the Giants, but on the season, I mean, he's been hot to close it out. Has a 110 weighted runs created plus. Unfortunately for him, the actual numbers are pretty significantly worse than the expected numbers. He did hit his 20th home run the other day, so that's a big milestone for a guy heading out into free agency. But when you look at the 2 seasons combined with the Giants, we're talking almost 1,000 plate appearances with just 2 Fangraphs wins above replacement and just a 105 weighted runs created plus, so just barely above major league average offensively. And so, he's hoping that he can just have a ridiculously hot series that just inflates the numbers. But these are probably his final games with the Giants, and he's playing for something. And so Logan Webb could have been playing for, the major league innings lead. Right now he's tied for first with an American League pitcher, so he does lead the National League, but he's not scheduled to pitch again. The Giants released their pitching probables, and it's Landon Roop tonight. He is also playing for something because he has been really good since joining the rotation, and he's going again tonight. And if he can have another good outing, then he's going to firmly cement his name into that mix to be in the starting rotation like next year to start the season. And Hayden Birdsong also gets a start on Sunday, and he's been more volatile. He's been at times overpowering. He's been at times hit around, and the stuff is really kind of electric, but he's got to learn to harness it. But it's going to be a big outing for him to see if he can just end it on a high note and take that into the off season. So a lot at stake for those guys. Otherwise, there are no free agents. Wilmer Flores has a player option. Mike Yastrzemski is arbitration eligible, and so he would be playing for, he's a borderline non-tender candidate with a $7.9 million salary this season, and you get raises through arbitration, and it would be his final arbitration year in 2025. So expect that number to be around 10 million next year, which starts to get a little bit borderline, especially considering he will turn 35 next year. And he's not been great. He's more been solid, like in his Giants tenure. And so, he's hoping obviously to play great in these final 3 games and end his season on a high note. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, we are going to turn our attention to the overall numbers, the strikeouts. Have they been as big of a problem as it's been made out to be? Early on in the season, I would have said no. Now I might have a different answer. We'll get to it in just a second, but before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, myself included. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, hands down. Unlike on other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California. Yes, you can play in California, Texas, and Georgia as well. So I have had a ton of fun. You've seen me put my picks out there. I'm going to be picking tonight. I love playing. It's been a ton of fun. I can't recommend highly enough. So download the Prize Picks app today, and if you use code LOCKEDONMLB, all lowercase, you get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, as promised, we're going to look at some overall numbers for the Giants, getting into the strikeout totals, which has, come up as a concern. It's been talked about a lot. Like I'm seeing day in and day out, like the Giants struck out 14 times, the Giants struck out 17 times. And it's like, wow, yeah, those numbers do sound big. But then when we looked at the overall season numbers for the longest time early in the year, they were one of the teams that had the lowest strikeout rate. Like strikeout totals don't necessarily matter. Like you could score 20 runs in a game and have therefore more opportunities to strike out because you're having more at bats. Does that make sense? So it just means like strikeout rate is just strikeouts divided by plate appearances by the team. And so striking out 17 times when you get like 2 hits is a lot different than striking out 17 times when you get 17 hits. The strikeout rate is going to look a lot different, and that's what ultimately matters. So I don't talk about strikeout totals in a game very often. It's more about the rate at which players are striking out and the team at large. But it is something to look at, and I will get into it. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, later on today, I plan either today or tomorrow, I plan on making up for yesterday. I had a red-eye flight in which I tried to sleep but did not, and then I couldn't check into my hotel, and then I fell asleep. And so I apologize for missing yesterday's episode. We will make it up. We will make it up either later today, and I want to talk to Millard because, as we're going to get into later from Locked On D-backs, it's a crazy scenario that the D-backs are facing, one that we kind of have never seen before. So I'll get into that later and hopefully talk to Millard about it later today or tomorrow. So, yes, getting into the Giants and their strikeout rate. Hot topic. So just brass tacks here, just pure strikeout rate on the season. It has, in fact, crept up to the point where the Giants have the 11th highest strikeout rate in the major leagues. And you look at some of the teams ahead of them. This is something I always like to do. I mean, Detroit, the Tigers, who are on this ridiculous hot streak and are going to probably, in all likelihood, make the playoffs now out of nowhere, they have a higher strikeout rate than the Giants. The Braves have the exact same strikeout rate as the Giants, and the Braves are often considered this great offensive team. The Brewers, coasting to the postseason, are 13th, have the 13th highest strikeout rate. Again, the Giants are 11th. The Mets, who are in a good position, are 16th. The Giants are 11th. And so, I don't know. And you look at the Nationals have the 25th highest, in other words, 6th lowest strikeout rate, and they're not good offensively. And so there's not a total correlation. Like, strikeout rate gets somewhat overemphasized. But at the same time, like I said, for much of the early part of the season, the Giants were not in this position. And so it has really come on in the second half more so than in the first. And yeah, when I look at second half, which on Fangraphs, I assume that means not after 81 games, but in fact after the All-Star break, which is well past the halfway point of the season. But in the quote-unquote second half, which, again, I said I know what that means per their site, Giants have the second highest strikeout rate in the major leagues at 27.2%. So they're at 24% for the season, but since the All-Star break, they're over a quarter of the time striking out. So it's much a simpler way to look at it than just raw strikeout numbers, which again can be deceiving. If you're a really good offensive team, you're probably going to have more strikeouts because, like, just total numbers, because you're getting more plate appearances and therefore more chances to strike out. Whereas if you make an out every time, there's less chances to strike out. So anyway, the rate is just a way better way to look at it. And yeah, in the second half, they are second highest. So you're not wrong. But again, the second lowest is the Nationals, who are bad. I hesitated to say terrible. They have a weighted runs created plus in the second half of 91, and the Giants are at 94. And so, the Giants haven't been good either offensively in the second half. But when I look at, let's see the individual players and their strikeout rates, Marco Luciano and Luis Matos both over 40% in their combined 70 plate appearances. Grant McCray also over 40%, and he's come up to the plate 123 times here in the second half. Tyler Fitzgerald has had 243 plate appearances in the second half and has struck out 31.3% of the time. So, some of these young players are kind of leading the charge here. And then beyond that, there's not a ton of alarming numbers. Certainly the ones for Matos, Luciano, and McCray, anything over 40% is just unworkable. You've got to get that down into the 30s, preferably the low 30s at the highest. That's what Tyler Fitzgerald's kind of borderline there at 31.3%. But then you get to some other players like Michael Conforto and Matt Chapman, both at 26.1%, and that's it's a little worse than average, but it's workable as long as you're doing damage when you get your hits, which Matt Chapman, for example, in the second half, 44% above average, despite a strikeout rate that's about 4 points above league average. Mike Yastrzemski, 25.1%, but has still been a little bit above average offensively. Elliot Ramos has kind of continued to be good enough. Strikeouts and chasing were a problem for much of his career, but now that strikeout rate in the second half, which is where I'm focusing, I don't like to break the season into segments like this, but 24.8%, very manageable. Patrick Bailey, this is more of a concern. A 24 weighted runs created plus in 50 games in the second half of the season. So that's crazy low. 24. That's probably one of the lowest in baseball among players with at least, he's got 176 plate appearances. So if I sorted for 175 plate appearances minimum, 24 weighted runs created plus, again, 100 is average, so about 75% below average offense from Patrick Bailey, 2 seasons in a row with a second half plunge. And by the way, Marco Luciano with a 0 weighted runs created plus in 54 plate appearances in the second half of the season. So that's crazy awful too. 0, meaning 100%. It's kind of deceiving. 100% worse than average. So you can go lower. You can be 200% below average, but he's a 0 weighted runs created plus is never what you want to see And yeah, overall, Fitzgerald and Chapman have done nice work. Casey Schmidt has done nice work. Oh, so overall, what I'm trying to say is their season strikeout rate is not crazy, but the fact that they've gone backwards in the second half, I think a lot of it has to do with Grant McCray and Luciano and Matos. That I didn't even hesitate to at that, but Luis Matos, it is just 17 plate appearances, but he's known for not striking out, like having a super low strikeout rate, and so obviously out of whack there, leading the team in just 17 plate appearances with a strikeout rate close to 50%. But that's a tiny sample, and I wouldn't focus too much on that. The big picture is that neither Matos nor Luciano established themselves as guys who look to like have seized a role in 2025, whereas you can't say the same about Tyler Fitzgerald, for example, or Elliot Ramos. Those guys did seem to seize a role this season. And McCray, he does other things. You know, he runs really, really well, plays really good center field defense, but you do have Jung Hoo Lee coming back. So we'll see about all that. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, I want to get into the crazy scenario that the Diamondbacks are facing that the Giants contributed to, because by winning 2 out of 3, it put Arizona in this position. And so it's worth mentioning what's happened. And then I do hope, like I said, to talk to Millard from Locked On D-Backs about the scenario that Arizona is facing going into the final weekend. So we'll get into it in just a minute. And before we do, this episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Booking.com. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. Explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. And you may see that I'm in a hotel room right now if you're watching on YouTube. Like I said, with the red-eye flight and all that. So I'm in one of these U.S. cities where there's baseball. I'm not going to say where. It's a big surprise. But getting ready for some postseason baseball here. And Booking.com can make me a fan of any U.S. city, including this one I'm in right now, with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even if it's in your baseball rival city during the postseason. San Diego is going, which is a rival. It's a great place to visit. Los Angeles is going. A little bit too much traffic there for my taste, but you can definitely find some nice stays on Booking.com. So no matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any U.S. cities, from hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays. Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. All right, as promised, we're going to get into the crazy scenario the Arizona Diamondbacks are facing now as a result of losing 2 out of 3 to the Giants. So they're kicking themselves like, oh, if we, their fans, I'm sure Millard, like, if you could have just won 2 out of 3, then this scenario wouldn't be what it is. But it is because the Giants won 2 out of 3. So they did do some damage. Like the the Royals, like, recovered from the Giants winning. Sweeping, I should say, and their playoff odds, according to Fangraphs, up to 97.4%. A lot of that has to do with the Minnesota Twins just utterly collapsing down the stretch here. But Arizona, even with this win in the finale, still just sitting on 58.6% playoff odds entering their final 3 games. And those 3 games are coming, I actually don't even know, I did know, and I forgot who they're playing in this final series. It's the Padres in Arizona. So, the Padres are tough, and the Padres no longer fighting for the National League West. That was clinched again by the Dodgers. By the way, as an aside, I do love that they have to say 11 division titles in 12 years, and they can't say 12 straight. So even though it looks like a total anomaly, the fact that the Giants disrupted that streak, I love it, because otherwise you'd be looking at 12 straight division titles and they'd be MLB would be gushing all over about it. But no, it's 11 in 12 years. Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, Padres are good. They've lost 2 straight. I think they were 50-50 at one point, so that would make them 41-18 since the All-Star, or since they were 50-50. So they're hot, and obviously that's tough for Arizona. So anyway, the crazy scenario the Diamondbacks are facing, I'm just going to read this directly from MLB Trade Rumors because and Nick Deeds was the writer of this. It's called The Opener, Freeman, Twins, Diamondbacks, and it came out today, this morning, and it says, D-backs look to clinch. The Padres have already clinched an NL wildcard spot, but their final series of the regular season will still have major playoff implications as they head to the desert to face the Diamondbacks in a 3-game set. Arizona currently holds an NL wildcard spot with an 88-71 record that leaves them essentially tied with the Mets at 87-70, which means that currently the Mets. Oh, I see. Okay, never mind. I thought it meant tiebreaker stuff, but it doesn't. The Mets have just played one fewer game. And it says, and 1 game up on the Braves, who are 86-71. Still, Arizona's playoff hopes aren't quite as solid as it might seem at first glance after the final 2 games of this week's series between Atlanta and New York were rescheduled for Monday. So the final 2 games of this week's series between Atlanta and New York, which is a huge series in this NL wildcard race, they were postponed due to rain and pushed to Monday. So, like, way pushed out and until a day after the regular season ends. And they're going to play those games because those games are going to matter. So that's going to be a huge double header that's going to have major implications. So, including for Arizona. So it says, that leaves the Snakes in need of a sweep of the Padres this weekend in order to punch their ticket to the postseason without waiting on the results of Monday's doubleheader, as both the Mets and Braves hold the tiebreaker over them. So Arizona would lose a tie over either team. And okay, so I'm just going to continue before I give my final analysis here. If Arizona manages to sweep the Padres, they'd finish with a record of 91-71. Either the Mets or Braves could reach that win total, but at least one club is guaranteed to fall short, as the Braves would need to win all 5 of their remaining games in order to do so, while the Mets would need to go at least 4-1, and that's impossible because they're playing each other twice in this doubleheader. Anything less than a sweep, however, leaves Arizona's fate in the hands of a doubleheader that will occur after Arizona has wrapped up their regular season, a frustrating circumstance for the Diamondbacks that would leave them in limbo ahead of a potential NL wildcard series on Tuesday. They'll kick off their attempt to clinch at 6:40 local time this evening with veteran righty Merrill Kelly on the mound opposite Padres veteran Yu Darvish. So anyway, ha 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 ha. The Diamondbacks, unless they can sweep the Padres, which of course they could, seems unlikely given the Padres are really good, they are going to, if they lose a single game, they're going to have to sit there and wait until after the season and watch a doubleheader in order to determine their fate. So it is highly unusual, and I just wanted to say that's what I enjoy so much, that the Giants helped put them in this position. Yeah, I'm bitter and salty, and I didn't want to see them clinched with a win against the Giants, and they didn't. And in fact, now they almost can barely clinch in the regular season by Sunday. They have to sweep. It's the only way. And so huge implications still for Arizona, and the playoff odds, again, according to Fangraphs, just over 50%. It's not very high. And so these games are enormous, and the Giants winning 2 out of 3, hey, could still end up like essentially booting Arizona from the postseason. So I love that as a competitor. I live for it. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again, later on today, not tomorrow. It's the weekend, but we're going to do another episode today or tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.